How to master skills for the TOEFL iBT Listening Advanced. Unit 2. Listening for Main Purpose. Sample iBT question. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor. Dr. Drexler, may I speak with you for a moment, please? You're not too busy right now, are you?
No, not at all, Adrian. Come into my office and have a seat. So, tell me, what's on your mind right now?
Well, you may or may not know this, but I'm applying to several different graduate schools, so I was hoping that you would be able to write a few letters of recommendation that I could send out along with my application.
I'm honored that you've asked me, Adrian, and I'm more than happy to help you out, but don't you think you ought to ask Professor Smith instead? After all, he is your advisor, and he's the professor that you've worked with the longest in all of your years here. I would think that he would be able to write the best, most comprehensive letter of recommendation for you.
Yes, sir, you're absolutely right. The only problem is that I can't get in touch with Professor Smith at this moment. Apparently, he is still at that conference somewhere in Europe, and I don't know when he's coming back. I left him a couple of voice messages, and I've emailed him several times, but he hasn't responded to any of them. Question. Why does the student visit the professor? Practice with conversation. A. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor. It's great to see you. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
How can I help you?
Well, in our last lecture, you mentioned that the final exam would be a cumulative test and that it would cover the entire textbook and at least one other history book. I think the textbook is too big. It has over 800 pages, so I'm thinking of withdrawing from your history course.
Oh, that's a shame.
I really don't want to drop the course, so I thought I'd consult you in case you had any helpful advice.
Well, first of all, it's unusual for students to withdraw this late in the semester. We've already completed 5 weeks of the course.
Yes, I know, but the deadline for withdrawal isn't until next week. I enjoy your class and I love history, but there's too much information to study. Also, I have a part-time job here on campus, so I don't have much time to study.
Well, let me take a quick look at your record. I see. It looks good. You're doing fine. I don't think there is any danger of you failing the course.
No, there isn't.
It appears to me that you're working quite hard. So far, you have done well on the quiz and on the book report. Your participation is good too, so I think it would be a real shame to see you withdraw after having done so much work.
Yeah, I know. To be honest, I'm not worried about passing the course. The problem is that I need high grades so I can get into law school or graduate school. I don't want to risk getting a low grade and there's too little time to study the entire textbook. What do you think I should do?
Well, are you familiar with HIT? It's our history tutoring program.
No, I'm not. I've heard about math tutors and ESL tutors, but I've never heard anything about tutors for history classes.
Let me tell you about it. It's not a well-known program because we just started it this semester. Graduate students can provide you with free tutoring 3 times a week. Some of the HIT tutors reported to me that they spend a lot of time summarizing the textbook and providing advice for exams and assignments.
Yes, but unfortunately, most of these university services are offered only in the daytime, and that's when I have to work. I usually work until the early evening.
Oh, no problem. The tutoring sessions usually don't start until after 8 p.m.
Wow! Can anyone use HIT?
Yes, it's available free of charge for all undergraduate students.
That's good. Where can I get more information?
Visit our homepage, click on the HIT icon, and you should be well on your way.
Okay, now I'm excited. I'm going to check this out as soon as I get back to my computer.
Let me know if you have more questions.
Thanks for your help.
My pleasure. 1. Why does the student visit the professor? 2. How do HIT tutors help the undergraduate students? 3. What is the likely outcome of this conversation? B. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a manager.
Are you the cafeteria manager?
Yes.
Oh, you're just the person I want to see.
Yes, I heard you wanted to talk to me about the snack bar.
That's right. I live in the dormitory next door, and for the past month some of my friends and I have tried to buy things from your snack bar late in the evening, but it usually closes at 10. We wanted to stay open much later.
Well, we've already extended the snack bar hours to 10 p.m. Last year we closed at 9.
I know, and I appreciate the extended hours. But you're unaware that many students, especially those from the dormitory, like to hang out in the cafeteria in the evening to take a break, do homework, work on group projects, or to study. There's usually a steady flow of traffic there until late in the evening, especially during exam week. It would be very convenient if you stayed open until midnight. Late at night, students don't always feel like walking 10 minutes to the nearest convenience store, and during exam week, we're too busy to go for a walk late at night.
Well, I understand your situation, but we need to close by 10 o'clock so that the cleaning staff can come in and clean the snack bar and surrounding area. Our custodians finish work at 10:30, and therefore there's nobody to clean the snack bar after 10:30. If the students working at the snack bar leave at 11 or later, there's nobody to clean up after them. It takes about 30 minutes to clean the grill and cookers.
Well, why don't you ask the snack bar staff to clean up?
I'd like to, but we usually only employ them to serve in the snack bar rather than to do cleaning work. Also, the custodians are unionized, and there's a clause in the collective bargaining agreement that prevents other people from doing their work.
Well, why don't you just extend the hours until 12, but not allow any cooking after 10? Just sell packaged goods after 10.
Well, I don't know. I don't really know what to say.
Well, I started a petition. Let me show it to you. Here it is. I've already got over 100 signatures from students. Many of them live in the dormitory, and I think I can get more.
Oh, my goodness. Well, in that case, I don't think we need to have a big debate over this. When are the midterm exams?
They start on October 22nd.
All right. I'll ask the snack bar staff to keep it open until 12 from October 22nd to October 27th.
That would be good, but we'd appreciate if you could start doing it on Sunday, October 21st, the evening before the exams begin.
Okay, we'll keep it open until 12 for a full week. If everything goes well, or rather I should say if there are no complaints, we can do it again during exam week.
We would appreciate that.
1. Why does the student meet with the cafeteria manager? 2. According to the conversation, why does the student want to extend the snack bar hours? Choose 2 answers. 3. What can be inferred from the conversation? C. Listen to part of a conversation between 2 students.
Hey, Mark. I haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing?
Hi, Julie. I'm fine. Did you eat lunch yet?
Yes, I just ate. I had a slice of pizza.
Why don't you sit with me for a while? I'm almost finished eating.
Sure.
Would you like some of my juice?
No, thank you. I just had a Coke. How were your exams?
They were okay. I just finished my last midterm examination an hour ago. Now it's all over. It's such a real relief. I didn't sleep much in the last few days.
I know how you feel. Fortunately, I finished my last midterm exam a few days ago, so I have been off for the last few days.
Why are you on campus then? I'd be at home resting.
Oh, I have a part-time job here today.
Really? How's the pay?
It's great. It's the best part-time job I've ever had. I'm getting $30 an hour.
$30? That's great. What are you doing?
I'm tutoring math.
That sounds good. Is it difficult work?
Not really. I guess you could say it's a little difficult, but challenging and enjoyable.
What kind of math are you teaching?
Mostly it's basic math. Many of the students are freshmen or high school students.
It sounds like a great idea. I had a part-time job, but it only paid minimum wage or close to it. I'd rather do tutoring work.
Yes, the pay is much better, and it's more interesting.
Is it easy to find students?
Well, if you do a good job, the number of students will gradually build up. I get most of my students by word of mouth.
That sounds great. Do you think I could do that?
Maybe, but you have to be good at math. You're majoring in history or psychology, aren't you?
Yes, I'm majoring in psychology. I used to major in history.
I've studied a lot of math, so I'm capable of teaching it well.
Well, I haven't studied much math, but I've already studied first-year university math, and I passed the course without much difficulty.
I think most people prefer to learn from someone that has taken a lot of math.
Yes, I know, but I think I could do it.
Perhaps, but you should think it over. You know a little more than the students, but in my opinion, you should be at least twice as knowledgeable as the person you are tutoring.
Perhaps you're right.
And you need to be familiar with all areas of math, including algebra, trigonometry, calculus, statistics, and so on.
Did you say calculus?
Yes?
You know, on second thought, you might be right. I'm not very familiar with calculus. It's very difficult.
Well, perhaps you could teach some other subjects. If I hear anything, I'll let you know.
Sure, thank you. 1. Why does the man ask the woman so many questions about tutoring? 2. How is the woman more qualified than the man to tutor math? 3. Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question. What does the woman mean when she says this?
It's great. It's the best part-time job I've ever had. I'm getting $30 an hour.
D. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a professor.
Professor Smith, can I speak with you for a minute?
Sure.
I tried to call you 3 times this week, and I sent you 3 emails in the last few days, but you never responded.
Oh, Jennifer, I'm very sorry. I have been out of town for the last few days. I didn't have time to open all of my emails yet. In fact, yesterday I didn't get home until well past midnight, and I couldn't receive any phone calls while I was out of town.
That's okay. I understand.
What can I do for you?
I want to know if you can help us set up an employment conference for November 20th and 21st.
Oh, Jennifer, conferences are a lot of work, and I already have a lot on my plate. Conferences can be better accomplished through the Student Employment Center. That's what the center is there for.
The Student Employment Center indicated that it won't set up an employment conference exclusively for nursing majors.
Well, maybe you don't need an employment conference because the center has a lot of connections and it can introduce you to a number of employers. Isn't that enough?
No, not at all. The center isn't necessarily the best way to find a nursing job. Most of their contacts are outdated.
That's too bad. But Jennifer, I'm already overworked as it is. More importantly, we've tried this a few times before and the conferences were a huge failure. The students were unwilling to do any work. They expected the faculty to do everything, so very little was accomplished. Part of the problem is that the students had no experience arranging conferences. Meanwhile, the faculty didn't have quality time to make it a success.
Well, don't worry about that. I have lots of experience arranging conferences. I used to work for the Nursing Association and helped organize numerous nursing conferences. So I already have a lot of names and key contacts, and I know a lot of people in the industry.
Good for you. I didn't know that about you.
But most of my contacts are regional. You've worked abroad and in other states, so you have a lot of contacts in areas where I don't. All we need you to do is make a few phone calls to see who is interested in participating and who's looking for nurses next year. I think that with your contacts and mine, that should be enough. Other than making phone calls, your participation will be very limited. The students will take care of the logistics and do most of the work.
It sounds like you've really thought this out and you know what you're doing. I wish you were here the last time we had a conference. It was quite embarrassing. I'd love to help you, so go ahead and start organizing.
Thanks a lot.
But don't expect me to do all the work.
No, I won't.
1. Why does the student speak with her professor? 2. Why does the student want the professor's help? 3. What can be inferred from the conversation? Practice with lectures. A. Listen to part of a lecture in a zoology class.
The next kind of bear I'd like to discuss with you today is the polar bear. As I already mentioned on Tuesday, polar bears only live in the Arctic, primarily in northern Canada, northern Russia, and Alaska. If, for example, you are in southern Canada, you won't see any of these bears. Now, you're probably aware that the Arctic is an extremely harsh environment and one of the coldest places on Earth. But let me remind you of what it's really like in the Arctic, especially in late December or early January. The temperature frequently drops below minus 40 degrees centigrade and sometimes gets even colder. Combine that with strong winds, little or no sunlight, and very little vegetation, and what you get is an environment in which very few species are capable of surviving. The polar bear, however, thrives in this kind of environment. The polar bear spends his time roaming throughout the Arctic, walking on land and ice, swimming in freezing seawater, and floating on sheets of ice while looking for seals, fish, and other food. Their favorite food is seals, which they find along the edges of the ice, in holes in the ice, and under cracks in the ice. They have no natural enemies in this environment, which is perfectly suited for them. Now, what you see behind me is a photo of a polar bear. As you can see, it's very beautiful. But what's not apparent in this and other similar photos is the bear's actual size. Polar bears are much bigger than the brown and black bears we discussed earlier. In fact, they're huge. They weigh up to 1,600 pounds, or 270 kilograms. And they're designed to survive in their environment. They have very thick white fur, which camouflages them from the snow and ice, and insulates them from the extreme cold. It's much thicker than the fur of bears that we discussed earlier. Polar bears are also strong swimmers. They have large front paws that amazingly allow them to swim a few hundred kilometers from land. Despite their impressiveness, polar bears, unlike black bears, are an endangered species. This is a result of global warming, which will be a topic of our next film. The Arctic is becoming too warm for the bears. That ice I just mentioned to you is now disappearing. It breaks up much earlier in the spring, and now it's a lot further from land. Ice thickness in the Arctic has decreased by 40% in the last 30 years, and some scientists predict that the Arctic basin might not have any ice in another 50 years. For polar bears, this is terrible. Ice is essential to their existence. Less ice means fewer seals and less food. Polar bears do their hunting in the winter, but because the winter is getting shorter and because the ice is disappearing earlier, they have less time to restore their fat. In the summer, they're forced to remain on land for longer periods of time, and during that time they live off the fat stored in their bodies. 30 years ago, they spent just over 3 months on land. Now, it's almost 4 months. The shorter the winter and the earlier the ice breaks up, the less time they have to restore their fat. This reduces their strength and energy. With less ice, polar bears must swim further to reach it. This further reduces their strength and energy. These circumstances have steadily decreased the bear population over the last 30 years.
1. Why did the professor describe the harshness of the Arctic environment? 2. What is one difference between polar bears and brown bears? 3. What is the likely outcome of continued global warming? B. Listen to part of a lecture in a geology class.
Okay now, I don't have anything further to say about volcanoes, unless there are any more questions. Are there any questions? Okay, good then. I shall continue our discussion on waves, but this time I'd like to focus more on earthquakes. As you know, some earthquakes are not powerful enough to be felt on the Earth's surface, while in others, people can indeed feel the earth shaking. And of course, there might be violent movement, often with catastrophic results. What we feel during an earthquake or huge explosion are a series of waves called seismic waves. These waves are similar to sound waves and light waves. For example, they reflect and refract, and they change speed and direction as they travel through different densities of rocks. In an earthquake, you might initially feel some minor trembling, then perhaps violent shaking, and then some more tremors. The reason why you feel these different types of movement is because there are different kinds of seismic waves. Some of them may easily be felt at the Earth's surface, while others are not. The reason for this is that not all waves travel at the Earth's surface or with equal amplitude. There are two major types of seismic waves, body waves and surface waves. The waves that you feel first are body waves. These mainly travel deep through the Earth's interior rather than at the surface. Some of them travel very fast, and that's why you feel them first. But because they travel deep inside the Earth, they're felt only as tremors. There are two types of body waves. The first type of body wave is the P wave, or primary wave. It's the fastest kind of seismic wave. These waves can move through any type of material, including rock and fluids. Because of this and because of their speed, these waves are the first to reach the Earth's surface. You likely won't even hear or feel these waves, but animals may hear them. They're not strong enough to cause significant damage. The other type of body wave is the S wave, or secondary wave. Because S waves travel at half the speed of P waves, you won't feel them in the beginning. This kind of wave moves rocks from side to side or up and down. Their amplitude is several times higher than P waves, and they are more destructive than P waves. The second major category of wave is the surface wave. Unlike body waves, surface waves move at or near the Earth's surface. These waves are similar to ripples on water. They are usually the most destructive type of seismic wave because of their lower frequency, larger amplitude, and longer duration. There are two types of surface waves. The first kind of surface wave is called a love wave. It's the fastest surface wave. These make the ground move from side to side. The other kind of surface wave is the Rayleigh wave. It rolls along the ground just like a wave rolls across a lake or an ocean. As a result, it moves the ground up and down and side to side in the same direction that the wave is moving. Most of the shaking felt from an earthquake is due to the Rayleigh wave, which can be much larger than the other waves. They are slower than body waves, and sometimes cars might appear to be moving up and down with these waves.
1. Why did the professor discuss seismic waves? 2. According to the lecture, which of the following describes surface waves? Choose two answers. 3. What can be inferred from the lecture? C. Listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class. Your textbook uses the terms Jovian planets and gas giants interchangeably, and I'm going to do the same. There are 4 of these planets: Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, and Jupiter. The biggest of these is Jupiter, and that's the planet I'll be focusing on. Jupiter and the Jovian planets are very different than Earth, Mars, and even our Moon. These gas giants have a rocky or solid core, but they're composed mostly of various gases such as hydrogen, helium, methane, and others. They're also composed of liquids. One huge difference between the Jovian planets and the rocky planets is that the Jovian planets do not have a solid surface. Their exteriors are gaseous, and these gases blend with their atmospheres. Therefore, you wouldn't be able to land a spacecraft on Jupiter nor on any of the other gaseous planets, nor would you be able to walk on them. Possibly, you could float through them, but if you tried that on Jupiter, you would eventually burn up because Jupiter is extremely hot. Now, here are some more facts about the Jovian planets. These planets have a number of rings and moons. Saturn has the most spectacular rings, and Jupiter, with 63 moons, has the most moons. Neptune has some faint rings and 13 moons. Uranus has 13 faint rings and 27 moons. Jovian planets are also the largest planets, much larger than the rocky planets. Jupiter is the biggest planet in the solar system, and it's huge. It's several times bigger than any of the other planets in the solar system. In fact, it's twice as massive as all of the other planets combined. By comparison, it's about 318 times more massive than Earth, with a diameter 11 times greater than Earth. Now, believe it or not, despite its magnificent size, Jupiter is not the largest planet in the universe. Larger planets have recently been discovered outside the solar system, and I'm sure more will be discovered in the future. Weather patterns on the Jovian planets are much different than the rocky planets. For example, they don't have any oceans or land masses, which greatly influence weather conditions on Earth. Jupiter has the Great Red Spot, a storm which is at least 340 years old and seems to be a permanent fixture on the planet. The storm is bigger than Earth. Wind speeds on Jupiter often reach up to 600 kilometers per hour. Neptune has a similar phenomena, the Great Dark Spot, a cyclonic storm about the same size as Europe and Asia combined. This type of phenomenon does not exist on the rocky planets. Again, I reiterate, the Jovian planets are much different than Earth. The rings that surround Jupiter are composed of smoke-like particles that are sprayed about when its moons are bombarded by energetic meteor impacts. The halo, which is the innermost ring, is 22,000 kilometers wide, and Jupiter is always covered by a layer of clouds. The rings surrounding the other Jovian planets are composed of similar particles. Spacecraft have taken numerous close-up photos of the Jovian planets. Some of these photos appear in your textbook. The word close-up has to be taken with a grain of salt. The photo I'm showing you now, just a minute. Would someone turn off the light, please? Okay, there it is. This breathtaking view was obtained by Voyager 1 when the spacecraft was 9.2 million kilometers from Jupiter. Oh, and here's another. This is Neptune. I think it's the most beautiful planet. I love the blue color. It looks like one giant ocean, but it's not ocean. Is there life on the Jovian planets? Is that possible? Well, scientists seem to agree that there probably wouldn't be any Earth-like life on these planets because there's little water in their atmospheres, and any possible solid surface deep inside these planets, for example in Jupiter, would be under too much pressure. 1. Why did the professor compare Jupiter with Earth? 2. According to the lecture, which of the following describes Jupiter? Choose two answers. 3. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. Why does the professor say this? Your textbook uses the terms Jovian planets and gas giants interchangeably, and I'm going to do the same. D. Listen to part of a lecture in a climatology class.
The last thing I want to discuss with you today are monsoons. Because we don't have much time remaining in today's lecture, and because the next class will be our physical geography midterm examination, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Your textbook provides you with more than ample information on this topic, so please refer to it before next Monday's examination. Needless to say, I can guarantee there will be at least a few examination questions on this topic. Very briefly, though, I'd like to tell you that monsoons are an annual weather phenomenon. In fact, the word monsoon derives from an old Arabic word, which means season, because these rainstorms occur every year. More specifically, they're very heavy rains which originate from moist air masses that move inland from the ocean. What actually happens is that air masses move from cool air to warm air, or from a high-pressure system above the Indian Ocean to a low-pressure system over the continent, causing it to rain in South Asia. And as your textbook indicates, most monsoons happen in continental Asia. Smaller ones occur in northern Australia, equatorial Africa, and, to a much lesser extent, right here in the southwestern US. Now, unlike earthquakes, volcanoes, flash floods, ice storms, droughts, and most of the other natural phenomenon that we discussed during the last few weeks, monsoons surprisingly have a very beneficial impact. Although the heavy rains might be unwanted in some places, monsoon rains supply about 90% of India's total water supply. So right there, you have 1 billion people benefiting and relying on this rain. This rain is essential for crops. Imagine the hardship 1 billion people would endure if there were no monsoons. In fact, Asia, where most of the monsoons occur, contains half of the world's population. In other words, 3 billion people live in areas affected by the monsoons. Many of these people are poor subsistence farmers, totally reliant on monsoons for their livelihoods. Too little rain would result in famine. By the same token, these same people can suffer undue hardship if there's too much rain, resulting in disastrous floods. Flooding leads to severe damage and famine. Monsoons are less appreciated in the urban areas, where many people, both poor and wealthy, would be greatly inconvenienced by too much rain. Again, imagine the millions of poor people in third world cities living in porous, shabby homes drenched by extensive leakage. I mentioned that monsoons occur annually, but the precise date, duration, and quantity are impossible to predict. Also, monsoons are more common in the northern hemisphere, where there are more large land masses than in the southern hemisphere, which is mostly comprised of seawater. So, to reiterate, monsoons have positive and negative impacts. I'd like to continue this discussion on monsoons, but unfortunately we've run out of time today, and our examination will be during the next class. So I urge you to read more about this in your textbook.
1. Why did the professor mention that 90% of India's water supply comes from monsoons? 2. According to the lecture, which of the following describes monsoons? Choose two answers. 3. What aspect of monsoons does the professor mainly discuss? Integrated listening and speaking. A. Listen to a different version of the previous lecture and say the answers out loud.
Last week we talked about polar bears. I told you they lived in the Arctic, a very harsh environment. In late December and early January, the temperature falls below -40 degrees, and there is little or no sunlight. Very few species can survive in this environment. But, as I mentioned to you, this environment is perfect for polar bears. They cannot live without it. They are huge white animals, weighing up to 740 kilograms. They have thick white fur and are camouflaged from the environment. They have large front paws, allowing them to swim a few hundred kilometers from land. These meat-eaters spend most of their waking hours hunting seals under or near the ice. Unfortunately, these beautiful animals are now an endangered species. This is because the Arctic is becoming too warm for the bears. There is less ice and fewer seals to feed on. They have to swim further to reach the ice, and this reduces their condition. Most importantly, the polar bear population is now decreasing and expected to decline even more.
1. What do polar bears look like? 2. What do polar bears like to eat? 3. Why are polar bears an endangered species? B. Listen to a different version of the previous lecture and say the answers out loud.
Now, just as a brief review, monsoons are an annual weather phenomenon that usually occur in Asia. Typically, what happens is that cool, moist air above the ocean collides with dry, warm air above India. When this happens, it turns into heavy rain. The rainfall can impact all areas of Asia, especially India. Unlike other natural phenomena, monsoons can be extremely beneficial. For example, they supply India with 90% of its water supply and water for subsistence farmers throughout Asia, who use it for their crops. Unfortunately, too much rain can result in disaster, such as flooding and famine. The precise dates and duration of monsoons are impossible to predict. Monsoons are more common in the northern hemisphere, where there are more large land masses than in the southern hemisphere, which is mostly comprised of seawater.
1. What causes monsoons to occur in India? 2. How do monsoons benefit farmers? 3. Why are most monsoons in the northern hemisphere? TOEFL iBT practice test. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and a student center employee.
Excuse me, I was here last week for a few interviews. I'm just checking if you've heard from any of the employers yet.
Yes, we've started to hear from a few. I have a list here.
Oh, that's me, right there. What job is that?
This is the media assistant position. It's a 3-month contract and it starts soon.
Media assistant? I didn't even have an interview for that job. How did I get it?
Well, I guess they received your application and then hired you based on your experience and qualifications. Or perhaps they contacted your references.
That's great. I hope it's a good job. I don't know anything about it. Do you know exactly what it's about? Is it a good job?
Well, first of all, the job is with Best Views. They're a local company that produces a lot of educational films, documentaries, news clips, and sometimes special events. Also, many of the professors from this university work on those films. But to answer your question, I think it is a good job. It's not dirty or dangerous or anything like that. A lot of the students here had that job and they liked it. It's very interesting and it's a lot better than most of the work students end up getting.
Well, what exactly does a media assistant do?
A number of things. It's not really an office job or a sedentary job. You have to travel a lot.
Really? That's good. I don't mind traveling. Which cities would I have to travel to?
Well, I didn't mean road trips, but you have to travel a lot around the city or near the city. You have to pick up and deliver any movies, videos, and films that are being edited. So perhaps the filming might take place at an event just outside of the city. You take the film back to the Best Views Media Center, which is located just across the street from campus, and then return any edited films to other destinations throughout the city. You have a driver's license, right?
Yes, sure. I used to have a part-time job as a taxi driver. I drove full-time last summer.
I see. Well, maybe that's why they hired you. This job is going to require a lot of driving, and you'll be driving their vans. They have nice vans.
Okay. When does the job start?
You'll have to get all of the details directly from the employer, but most of these jobs are supposed to begin early next month. Here's a phone number. Just call this person. Her name is Emily. I've met her a few times. She's very nice. She should be able to answer all of your questions. I think she might be your supervisor.
I'll do that. Thanks a lot.
No problem. I hope it all works out for you.
1. Why did the employee ask the student if he had a driver's license? 2. According to the conversation, what does a media assistant do? 3. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Well, first of all, the job is with Best Views. They're a local company that produces a lot of educational films, documentaries, news clips, and sometimes special events. Also, many of the professors from this university work on those films. But to answer your question, I think it is a good job. It's not dirty or dangerous or anything like that. A lot of the students here had that job and they liked it. It's very interesting and it's a lot better than most of the work students end up getting.
What can be inferred from the woman's comments? 4. Why does the student visit the student center? 5. What will the student probably do next? Listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class. Are there any more questions about the Chinese calendar? No? Okay. So to continue, the ancient Chinese were not the only ones who had a calendar. Other ancient cultures, including the Romans, the Assyrians, and the Babylonians, all had calendars, and of course so did the Egyptians. Many of the ancient calendars were relatively useless. In Egypt, there were different kinds of calendars.
What do you mean different kinds of calendars?
Well, for example, they had a civil calendar for the government and another one for agriculture.
Wait, you mean they had two calendars at the same time?
Yes, in fact, for 2,000 years, they had three concurrent calendars.
That sounds so confusing. Why did they have so many different calendars?
Well, different calendars developed for different reasons or different purposes. And yes, it probably was confusing because these calendars varied in length. One was a little shorter than another, and you'd have to wait forever before they were in sync again.
Ha ha ha! It sounds bizarre.
Well, let's not forget, these were ancient times.
Were these calendars any good?
Yes, in fact, the first usable calendar started in Egypt a very long time ago, in 4236 BC. This was originally a lunar calendar, but over time, they started to use the stars rather than the moon for making more accurate predictions. It was a useful calendar because it predicted precisely when the Nile would flood. At that time, farmers depended heavily on the Nile and its flooding to supply water for their crops. The floods also deposited rich soil throughout the plains. Because of this rich soil, they were able to develop a sophisticated agricultural system which helped sustain a large population. So the calendar was useful and important for planting and harvesting crops. The year was divided into 3 seasons, each with 4 months. There were 30 days in a month. They added 5 days at the end of the year to make it 365 days. The civil calendar regulated the government and its administrators. One problem was the discrepancy between these two calendars. Months in the lunar calendar occurred at the same time every year, but this was not the case for the civil calendar. It was a few hours shorter than the lunar year, and therefore its months occurred at a different time every year. In fact, it took 1,460 years for the two calendars to agree or be in sync with one another. This 1,460-year period is referred to as a Sothic cycle. Therefore, a second lunar calendar was created based upon the civil year. Its purpose was to regulate religious affairs, and it was designed to agree with the civil calendar. However, the original lunar calendar was never abandoned and was continued to be used because of its usefulness for agricultural purposes. Thus, 3 different calendars coexisted, each with a different purpose. The years were counted according to the duration of the reign of a king. For example, they'd have the 8th year of King A and the 2nd year of King B. Also of note, the Egyptians started their day at sunrise rather than at sundown, and so a month would begin at sunrise as well. 1. Why did the professor mention how the Nile supplied the plains with water and rich soil? 2. Why were the first 2 calendars not in sync? 3. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question. Yes, in fact, the first usable calendar started in Egypt a very long time ago, in 4236 BC. This was originally a lunar calendar, but over time they started to use the stars rather than the moon for making more accurate predictions. It was a useful calendar because it predicted precisely when the Nile would flood. At that time, farmers depended heavily on the Nile and its flooding to supply water for their crops. The floods also deposited rich soil throughout the plains. How did the original calendar become a more accurate predictor? 4. What aspect of calendars does the professor mainly discuss? 5. According to the professor, what did the Egyptians use their calendars for? Choose 2 answers. 6. What is the professor's opinion of the Egyptian calendar based on star movements?